How are we doing, Peter? Are we all present and correct, or is anybody yet to join us?
The only member I hadn't spotted yet was Councillor Kay.
Okay.
Other than that, I think we're okay.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock, the 3rd of February 2021. We are live on YouTube, so for all those attending this meeting and for all those watching on YouTube, very good evening to everybody. I might say in particular, members of the public watching on YouTube, it's much appreciated that you engage with the process and show interest. And although we've just slipped into February, I think this is the first meeting of this committee this calendar year. So I think I can squeeze in an extremely late Happy New Year to everybody. Let's hope it gets better as the year progresses. Before we go any further, given the times we live in, I'm required just to read this short announcement. The local authorities and police and crime panels, coronavirus, flexibility of local authority and police and crime panel meetings, England and Wales, Regulations 2020, came into force on Saturday, 4th of April 2020, to enable councils to hold remote committee meetings during the COVID-19 pandemic period. This is to ensure that local authorities can conduct business during this current public health emergency. This meeting of the Development Management Committee is being held remotely under these regulations via the Zoom application and is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. The next thing that we have become accustomed to do as a committee is to introduce ourselves to those watching on YouTube. And for these purposes, I always just, for clarification, draw a distinction between the different types of people participating on the screen. Broadly, we have the following categories of people. There are councillors who are members of the committee, and it is only those people who will make the decisions this evening. We've also got some councillors on the screen who are not members of the committee, and I'll come back to those a bit later. And then I think the third category is that we have officers of the council showing on the screen, and these variously are planning officers, legal officers, democratic services officers. So as has become the custom of this committee, I'm going to start by asking the members of the committee to introduce themselves. And I'll go first. My name is Bob Deering and I'm the chairman of the committee. And then simply in the order that they appear on the papers, David Andrews, if you could just say hello, please.
Good evening, Chairman, fellow members and everybody watching this evening. I'm David Andrews, member for Thunderidge and Standon, member of the
David.
committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Terence Beckett.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm Terence Beckett, All Saints Bishop Stortford member.
Thank you. Ruth Buckmaster.
Good evening, Chair and everyone. I'm Ruth Buckmaster.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can now. Yeah.
No, sorry, it took a while. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ruth Buckmaster, member for Sawbridgeworth Ward.
Thank you, Ruth. Ben Crystal.
Good evening. I'm Ben Crystal. I'm a member for Hertford Bengio.
Thank you, Ben. Rishi Fernando.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rishi Fernando, member for Ware Christchurch.
Thank you. Incidentally, Rishi, we know you've not been very well recently, so it's good to have you back with us. Well done. Thank you. Jonathan Kay.
Hello, yes, I'm Jonathan Kay, and I'm also a member for Ware Christchurch Ward.
Ian Kemp.
Everyone, I'm Ian Kemp, and I'm a member for Ware St Mary's Ward.
Tim Page.
Good evening, I'm Tim Page. I'm a member for Bishop Stortford Silverlees and a member of the Development Management Committee.
Thanks, Tim. Carolyn Redfern.
Good evening, I'm Carolyn Redfern. I'm a member for Hertford Seal and on the Development Management Committee.
Thank you. Peter Ruffles.
I'm Peter Ruffles, member for Benjo Ward.
And last but not least, the Vice Chairman of the committee, Tony Stowe.
Yes, I'm Tony Stowe, member for Datchworth Aston. So you forgot then. Sorry, Bob.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tony. And then just to move on to members on the screen, just to introduce Councillor Jan Goodeve. Jan is the executive member for the portfolio that encompasses planning. Just give us a wave, Jan. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if members of the public can see this picture on the screen, but we have one other councillor whose picture is showing on the screen. She's Councillor Rosemary Bolton, and she is here to speak to one of the items that we will be considering this evening. She will be speaking as a local member. We now move on to officers, and I'm just going to take the officers in the order that I can see them on my screen, so it's slightly random. So we start with Femi Nwanzi.
Good evening, Chair and everyone. My name is Femi Nwanzi. I'm a planning officer.
Thank you. Peter Mannings.
Peter Mannings, Democratic Services.
David Snell. Muted, David.
Good evening, I'm David Snell. I'm Service Manager for Development Management.
Thank you. Sarah Saunders.
Good evening, Sarah Saunders, Head of Planning.
Will.
Evening, Will Troop, Democratic Services Officer, acting as host.
Thank you. I should say to the public that Will's a very important man because he's operating the technology for the evening. So if we get shut down, it's down to Will. Rachel Collard.
Hello, Rachel Collard, Principal Planning Officer.
Thank you, Rachel. Kieran.
Hi, I'm Kieran McCullough. I'm the Conservation and Urban Design Officer for East Herts.
Thank you very much. And I can't see anybody else on my screen. Again, for the benefit of the viewing public, we have a legal officer participating called Victoria Wilder, but just at this split second, her connection is playing up. So you can neither see her nor hear her, but she's with us somewhere. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Now to move on to the agenda. Item 1 is apologies. I don't believe we have any apologies, but just
correct. There are none. Your committee's all here.
Thank you. Item 2 is Chairman's announcements. There's one relatively modest Chairman's announcement, which is that we're going to reverse the order in which we take the two main items of business. So we'll take item 5B first and follow that with item 5A. Declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare an interest?
Doesn't look like it.
No, thank you very much. Then we move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting that took place on the 2nd of December. If anyone has any comments, otherwise I'd invite a proposer and a seconder,
I'm
please.
happy to propose, Chairman.
Councillor Ruffles proposes and Councillor Beckett seconds. All those happy and in favour?
Okay, I can see a few hands up. There's a few members haven't put their hands up. Councillor Redfern, Councillor Fernando. Yeah, I think we're okay. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. Good, excellent. And in which case, that moves us on to item 5 on the agenda. And as I've just said, we are just going to swap around the batting order on item 5. So we're going to take item 5B first. This item commences at page 89 of the pack of papers for this meeting. The case officer is Femi Nwanze, so I'll immediately ask Femi to present this item to us, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. This is an application for a non-material amendment to the planning permission that was granted for the complete redevelopment of the goods yard at Bishop Stortford. The decision on this application needs to be taken in the context of the whole planning permission for the entire site. This is not itself a planning application. It is a mechanism that the government have put in place to enable developers to make minor changes to their planning permission without the need to go through the whole process again. So although the application itself was controversial at the time the original plan permission was granted, this is not an opportunity to open up all the issues relating to the main plan permission. Just in presenting this, I'd just like to highlight that this is not the only non-material amendment for this site. We've had a couple before. There are a total of 10 phases of this development. So this is the third one that we've had, and we would expect to see many more as the scheme rolls out. So if we can have the first slide, please. So this proposal seeks to make changes to what is currently known as phase 1D of the development, so which is comprised of residential and commercial floor space. So the multi-storey car park has already been constructed, and behind that will be blocks A1 to A5, which is ground floor commercial with residential above. Bellway Homes are the developers that are constructing this part of the development, and they wish to make some changes to the scheme and secure it through this process. The main change is what is highlighted on the floor plans, on your plans as number 3, which is down at the bottom of the screen. What was the plant is going to be relocated from right at the bottom of the screen next to the multi-storey car park. It will go to the left, right next to the hotel. And the reason for that change is to enable the scheme to join up with the hotel. The mains is going to be running through that site, and so that both sites can make use of the plant. As a result of that, there will be some internal reconfiguration of the car park, no increase in car parking spaces, just an internal reconfiguration to move some of the car parking spaces around. Highways are happy with that. And in addition, there are some modifications to the entrance on the eastern side of the building to satisfy the secured by design officer to ensure that there is more surveillance for when the residents enter the building. And on the front of the building, there is a proposal for a cantilever. So that's marked as number 5 on the plan. So it's right to the extreme left, to the north of the site. There will be a cantilever that will be going onto the building in order to assist with the structural stability of the building. If we can move to the second slide, please. So this slide shows in elevation form the changes that will be made. In particular, at the top on the eastern elevation, you'll be able to see the structural support that will go onto the side of the building to assist with the structural stability of the overall development. In addition, there is a proposal for a lift overrun. The height of the lift overrun is 80 centimetres. But one thing that I will say about this scheme is that further to the planning permission, and again, this is not unusual, there have been some revisions to the floor to ceiling height of the overall building. So the height of the structure will actually reduce. So for instance, on the south elevation, the original height was 19.4 metres, and even with the lift overrun, the height will now be 19.2 metres. So there is no increase in height of the building. The additional changes are corrections to errors that were on the drawings. But overall, our view is that these changes are non-material and we feel that they should be approved. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Femi. Now, we don't have any speakers in relation to this item. And of course, as Femi has explained to us, this item is not about revisiting the original application for permission, which was granted. Of course, it's very clear that the officers regard this as a non-material amendment. Just keeping those pointers in mind, if anybody does have any comments, do please put your hand up. I thought I saw a hand move there, but my screen.
Councillor Kay has his virtual hand raised.
Councillor Kay, thank you very much. Councillor Kay, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Kemp, I can see your hand. You and Councillor Kay. Okay, so we'll take it Councillor Kay first and Councillor Kemp second, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Femi, if you can just clarify, you said the plant was moving to the left and then your cursor went right to the top. I know the top is the left of the whole project, but you said it was moving closer to the hotel, which was on the picture on the left-hand side. So can you just clarify, is it going like really close to the hotel or just somewhere that's sort of equidistant between the hotel and the rest of it?
Thank you, Chair. If we can go to I think it's the first slide that shows the floor plans. Thank you. So I wonder whether it's possible to zoom in. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a small number 4 next to the multi-storey car park, and it's circled.
Femi, can I just interrupt you briefly? Will, is it possible to zoom in and make that drawing bigger on the screen for us? David's shaking his head. I don't know if it's possible.
I'm not sure it will be. I can give it a go, but I don't think so. I think it's just a set size image on a presentation.
Well,
Will, up on the left, and there's a little thing that says zoom in percentage.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Hold on. Thank you very much.
So right at the bottom of the screen next to the multi-storey car park, there's a little number 4. That is where the plant originally was supposed to go. And now it will be moved to the left, right next to the hotel. So if you scroll up, yes, just over there.
Okay.
So that it will share that facility with the hotel. That's the intention.
Right, thank you.
Ian Kemp?
Yes, it was a very small thing. Right at the very end, there was a colour picture displayed of the development, which was quite helpful, but it was only flashed on very briefly and then disappeared. It would be, could we just have a look at it for a little longer to see what the overall impression is, please?
I think that's the 3rd slide, Will.
Sorry, bear with me. I'm just
Sorry.
back up. Perhaps if there's any other questions, Chair, I'll just pull that back up because it's just going to take me.
Yes. Okay, we understand it takes a bit of time. I've not seen any other hands. We'll wait for you, Will.
Just while it's coming up, I can just explain that visual shows what the lift overrun and the vents at roof level will look like on the top of the building.
Yes, my other reason for asking was I was finding it rather difficult to visualise what was being referred to as this cantilever. And I'm afraid it wasn't obvious to me from the other picture that was flagged up. So I thought the colour picture might help as well.
It will, I think the elevations, the 2nd slide will show. It's just a tiny little structure on the corner.
Almost there, apologies.
Sorry, I hadn't realised it would be this difficult.
Oh yeah, you can see it
yes.
just right in the corner there. It's just that support under the building.
Okay, just there. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, thanks. That's a helpful overall impression of the development as well. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Femi, and thank you, Will, for digging that up for us. I'm not seeing any more hands on the screen, so if I could call for a proposer and a seconder, I'd be grateful.
Councillor Stowe's hand's gone up for that proposal, I think.
Tony, you're proposing, and a seconder?
Councillor Fernando?
Yes, thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour, please show hands.
Keep your hands up, members, so I can see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's everybody, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think that was unanimous, wasn't it?
Yes.
So I don't need to run through any alternatives. So that application or item is agreed, and just for form, I'll just take us through it. So this is item 5B on tonight's agenda. It's item 319-0033/NMA, non-material amendment to 317-2588 OUT, relocation of electricity substation from western elevation to northern elevation under block A2, together with internal and external alterations to blocks A1 to A3, including internal reconfiguration of car park, introduction of cantilevered support to northeast elevation, and modification to roof form and building height at Bishop Stortford Goods Yard, Station Road, Bishop Stortford, Parts. That's agreed and carried this evening. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so we now go on to item A on this evening's agenda. The papers for this begin at page 23 in the pack. And this is application 320-0897 FUL, and it relates to the demolition of all buildings and erection of 49 dwellings comprising 17 apartments, 14 3-bedroom and 18 4-bedroom houses, construction of associated roadways, access, landscape and ancillary works at Hertford Mill site, Tamworth Road, Hertford. Rachel Collard is the case officer for this item, and I'll ask Rachel please to present it to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, I would like to draw members' attention to the late representation document that has been circulated. I can confirm that following discussions with the applicant, a financial contribution of £20,000 has been secured towards the implementation of a residence parking zone, which would be included within any Section 106 agreement. And also, due to a calculation error by Hertfordshire County Council, it has enabled the affordable housing commuted sum to increase to £343,539. I'd also like to make you aware of a question that was posed by a councillor prior to the meeting regarding viability and affordable housing, and my response is set out in this document. In addition, a number of late representations have been received from residents and the Tamworth Road Neighbourhood Association. Many of these comments have previously been raised by contributors during the course of the application. However, a summary of those comments have been included and also seek to respond to the officer report. Similarly, comments from the applicant have been received which seek to address the neighbour objections that have been received. So this application is a full planning permission for the demolition of all existing buildings and the erection of 49 dwellings comprising of 17 apartments and 32 houses, with associated roadways, access and landscaping works. In the determination of the application, the key issues are the principle of development, which includes the loss of employment, floor space, flood risk management and housing, layout design and appearance, climate change and water efficiency, impact on residential amenity, heritage impact, highway impact and parking provision, land contamination and noise, and infrastructure delivery. The application site is located on the northern side of Tamworth Road within the settlement of Hertford. The site is a non-designated employment area and consists of a collection of buildings and large areas of hard standing. The site itself lies outside of the conservation area, but is located within an area of archaeological significance and is located within flood zones 1, 2, and 3. The site is surrounded on almost all sides by residential development with a railway line to the north. Members may recall a previous application was submitted at the site for 89 dwellings in 2019. However, this application has now been withdrawn. The site is owned by Tappenden & Co Limited, the parent company of Mode Lighting, and they operate from several locations, which include Tamworth Road, the High Street in Ware, and the main factory located within the Mead Lane Industrial Estate. Many of the buildings on the site were previously occupied, but are now vacant, with previous tenants relocating to other premises within the district. Will, if you can just go back a slide, that would be useful. Yeah, thanks. So the proposed development comprises of 32 dwelling houses and 17 apartments. The image you have on the screen at the moment is the layout of the proposed development. The development is arranged in a similar manner to these existing buildings within blocks A, B, C, and D, following the boundary from the rear of International House and along the boundary with the railway line. The apartment block would be sited in the northeastern corner of the site, and then 11 dwellings all front Tamworth Road, completing the street scene. 2 vehicular accesses are proposed, one of which exists to the east of International House, and a new access would be created further to the east onto Tamworth Road and will enable access to the dwellings and their associated parking spaces, which are to be located within garages, carports, and a shared parking area. The dwellings within blocks A, B, C, and D consist of flat roof 3-storey townhouses, with the exception of 5 dwellings within block D, which would have a recessed 4th floor and roof terraces. Well, if you can go through, because these are some of the house types. It should be noted that the roof terraces would not extend to the edge of the building, as this would have an impact on neighbouring amenity. Therefore, the design of these mean that they are set back, and a condition would be imposed restricting the area from being incorporated into the terrace, and details will need to be submitted to demonstrate this. The dwellings contained within blocks B, C and D would also have first floor rear facing balconies. And the design of these dwellings are more contemporary with the use of different materials and detailing to break up the elevations. However, the design also features elements that reflect the industrial heritage of the site. Block E is the apartment block, which is 3 stories in scale and would feature an undulating roof form and would be of a similar character to the other blocks. The 11 dwellings fronting Tamworth Road would reflect the more traditional style of property seen within Tamworth Road itself and would have accommodation over 3 floors, although the 3rd floor accommodation would be contained within the roof slope with front-facing conservation style roof lights proposed. Whilst the existing buildings, whilst the existing buildings are not small in size, it is acknowledged that the buildings proposed are higher than the existing buildings located on the site and clearly would be different from the existing situation. The buildings are set away from the site boundaries and mitigation measures have been proposed to ensure neighbouring amenity is retained. Whilst views of the development would be possible from the conservation area, it is not considered to result in harm that would amount to a refusal of the application. It should also be mentioned that a condition will be imposed removing permitted development rights for extensions, roof alterations and outbuildings so not to cause impact on the amenities of neighbouring occupiers and to maintain the quality of the development. Areas of soft landscaping will be provided with each house having access to a rear garden. The apartments will also have access to a shared space to the west of the building, which also provides relief within the development. Other smaller areas of soft landscaping would be proposed and would be a positive change to a site that is dominated by hard surfacing. Details of planting would be secured by a condition. In relation to the Council's climate change policies, the development will focus on a fabric first approach, meaning that the design achieves consistently high efficiency in order to achieve low CO2 emission rates. The proposals will include double glazing, energy efficient lights, combination boilers, photovoltaic panels to the individual houses within blocks A, B, C and D, and the details submitted as part of the application state that development will achieve a 45% carbon reduction relative to building regulations Part L 2013. In addition, water efficiency measures will be included and will limit water to less than 105 litres per person per day in line with policy. The proposals will also incorporate electric vehicle charging points and conditions have been imposed restricting the use of garages. So condition will be imposed restricting the use of garages, carports and parking areas from being used for anything other than parking of vehicles. Members will also note that an array of financial contributions have been secured and are set out within the committee report starting at paragraph 9.5. The contributions include money towards highway improvements, nursery education, primary and secondary education. A contribution has been secured for GP services, as well as a number of contributions that would be used towards children's play and provision for young people, parks and gardens and amenity space and sports halls. As you will see from the report, there are a number of other contributions that will be secured via Section 106 agreement. In relation to affordable housing provision, the development has been subject to a viability appraisal where the council instructed an independent viability consultant to review the applicant's submission, with extensive discussions having been undertaken. As set out within the officer report, it was concluded that the development was unable to provide 40% affordable housing on site as set out in policy. However, it was concluded that the financial contributions towards infrastructure could be provided and either 3 affordable rent properties or 5 first homes. Discussions with the council's housing officer concluded that the 3 affordable rent properties would be preferable to meet the council's housing need. However, as these units would be within a shared apartment block, there were concerns that a registered provider would not take these units on because of ongoing repair and maintenance obligations. And I understand the housing officer confirmed this position with the housing provider. Therefore, further discussions were undertaken and it was concluded that 1 3-bed house would be provided for affordable rent and a top-up commuted sum would be the most appropriate option. This will be secured through the Section 106 agreement. In conclusion, subject to the imposition of the conditions listed in the report and a signed Section 106 agreement, the proposal is considered to comply with both national and local policy. Having regards to all of the considerations, it is recommended that planning permission is granted. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rachel. Now, for this item, we do have speakers. We have 1 speaker against, 1 speaker for, and we have a councillor who wishes to speak to the application as well. So I think we start with the speaker against, who is Jan Robinson.
Correct. Yes, I believe she's in the waiting room.
If you could, or Will, if you could bring Ms. Robinson into this meeting.
I think she's just been admitted.
with us. Joan Robinson is a member of the Tamworth Road Neighbourhood Association.
I think she's with us now, Chair.
Is she? Okay, I can't myself see her. Yeah. Bear with me. Yes, I do. Hello, Joan Robinson. I can see you now. Thank you very much for joining us. There are rules of engagement, which I'm sure have been explained to you in advance, but just to remind you and for the benefit of the public, you have 3 minutes to speak from the moment you start. And if you're still speaking at 3 minutes, you will be cut off. So you need to try and get everything into 3 minutes. So when you're ready, you start and you have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm going now, yeah?
Yeah.
We are disappointed to lose employment from this site and from Hertford and the district. However, we accept that some development is now inevitable. What we find unacceptable is the size, massing and height of a scheme that tries to cram too many buildings onto a constrained site, squeezing in up to 244 people, doubling the population of Tamworth Road, with a building density that's twice that of the surroundings, and a pitiful amount of green space. In fact, you've just seen the totality of it on the planning officer's demonstration. It's from this overdevelopment that all other issues flow. One of these issues is parking, including the loss of more than 20 spaces on Tamworth Road itself. Not even enough space left for a residents' parking zone. However, the officer has assessed that the proposal is policy compliant, and that box has been ticked, even though we all know that this is another Liberty Rise in the making. So the application can't be refused on parking, but there are at least 5 policies where the developers have not been able to tick that all-important box. And we urge the council to refuse permission on those grounds. These are policy DES4 on all aspects of design, flexibility, size constraints of the site, neighbour amenity, especially privacy and overshadowing, all not met. And the scheme doesn't make the best use of land. Clearly, Hertford needs no more flats, with over 100 standing empty and 500 more already approved. Paragraph 124 of the NPPF, well-designed places, not been met. Policy HA2 ignored, no attempt to integrate the charming Edwardian Chapel Mill into the design. And in contravention of Planning Act 1990, the scheme is out of keeping with the adjoining conservation area and destroys the heritage street scene. And finally, policy DES1, master planning, has not been met. So, and you can see all of this in this document that we've submitted on the website. Finally, the enormous number of conditions indicates that this scheme has not yet been properly assessed. In particular, the high risk of flooding hasn't been addressed according to policy WAT5, and the condition and draining and flood risk are especially alarming. Couple this with an officer's report that says of the flood risk, we can accept no liability for any errors or inadequacies of the model, and you can understand why local residents are concerned about their safety, as well as every other aspect of the report. If members do decide to approve...
I think you've now hit 3 minutes, Ms. Robinson, so we have to stop you. But thank you for what you've said so far. We now have a speaker 4, and that speaker is Andrew Morris, who represents the applicant. I've just seen you arrive on my screen, Mr. Morris. The minute you're muted, you might want to unmute yourself, I think. I think you're still muted, Ms. Robinson. Okay, stop you. Yep. And you have, if you heard me explaining the rules to Ms. Robinson, you have exactly the same rules. So you have three minutes. I'll start when you start speaking. And as you've seen, when you get to 3 minutes, if you are still speaking, you will be cut off. Just away you go. The minute you're muted. Might want to unmute yourself, I think.
I should be unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you. So when you're ready to start, we don't count that as a start.
Right. Someone is suggesting that I'm still muted.
Yep. And you have you heard me explaining the rules to Ms. Robinson. You have exactly the same rules. So you have three minutes. I'll start when you start speaking, and as you've seen, when you get to 3 minutes, if you are still speaking, you will be cut off. Just away.
Thank you.
The minute you're muted.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Morris, and I'm the Managing Director of Tappinen & Co.
So, when you're ready to start, we don't count that as a start.
Right. Someone is suggesting that I'm still muted.
Mr. Morris, if you are speaking, I'm going to stop you because we've got some form of serious echo or something in this transmission. So just stop. Do not just don't say anything for the moment. Can we fix this technical issue?
I'm not sure if Mr. Morris was also playing back the meeting, maybe on YouTube. That's what it sounded like. I don't know if he stopped that now.
I think you're right, Will. For that, I apologise.
No problem. So I will restart the 3 minutes whenever you begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Andrew Morris, and I'm the Managing Director of Tappinen & Co Limited. And I've been working for the TCL Group since 1980. TCL owns several properties and businesses in Ware and Hertford, where we design and manufacture our own product range. Despite having had to make some regrettable redundancies due to COVID, we employ nearly 200 people in the UK, the majority of whom work in Hertford and Ware. Tamworth Road has seen progressive changes over the years, with residential properties replacing commercial units throughout the road. The buildings that we occupy are inefficient and unsuitable for the demands of a modern business, and they have come to the end of their useful life. We own another manufacturing site in the industrial zone in Mead Lane to the north of the railway line, and we wish to relocate our businesses and employees to this site to future-proof them for the next generation of shareholders, all of whom work for the TCL Group. We have a legacy attachment to the Tamworth Road site, and from an early stage, we wanted to be actively involved in the design so that we can leave behind a development that we can be proud of. Over the years, we have resisted approaches from many national housing developers to purchase the site, and instead we engage with a Hertfordshire-based developer and an award-winning architect who has produced an excellent design which we believe is sympathetic to the local environment. Throughout the design process, we have listened to the comments from the planners and the residents, and we have amended the scheme many times. The scheme has reduced dramatically from the original, which was for 89 units, mostly apartments, to where we are now with 49 units and mostly houses, as the residents requested. The design of the houses at the front are very much in the style of the original Victorian properties, whereas the houses and apartments at the rear offer a more industrial or warehouse feel. We have been proactively working with the council to ensure that the development of this site is of benefit to the whole of the community. This development provides modern, efficient and much needed family housing. Through the Section 106, we will be contributing in excess of £1.5 million towards education, GP services, children's play areas, transport, library services, as well as affordable housing. We have been planning this project for over 3 years, and we are now at a point where we need to move forward and secure a long-term sustainable base for our group of companies. This has been made even more important due to the current COVID situation, which has had a dramatic impact on our business. We trust that the councillors will consider this application to be a benefit to not just the local company and local employees, but also of the Hertford.
Sorry, Chair, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was muting. I'm just saying to Mr. Morris that you've hit the 3 minute mark, Mr. Morris. So we've, as we said, we've cut you off. But thank you very much for your comments up to that point. Okay, we now have one more speaker who is the local member, and that is Councillor Rosemary Bolton. Peter Mannings, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Councillor Bolton Well, does Councillor Bolton have to limit her remarks to 3 minutes?
No, it's ultimately at your discretion. Yeah, so there's
Okay.
no specific time limit.
That's fine. So you're not tied to 3 minutes, Councillor Bolton, but
Lucky me. Thank you. May I start, Chair?
yeah.
Good evening, committee members. My representations are longer, but please bear with me. The content, if not the delivery, is worth it. I'm speaking on behalf of the residents and myself as ward member. I understand that you're an experienced committee and will have read all the information, been briefed on the site, and be aware of the problems with developing this employment land. We do recognise that there will need to be some development on the Tamworth Mill site. The need for more residential properties is acknowledged and has already been accommodated within Kingsmead. However, it is regrettable and disappointing that landowners run down employment sites to make housing development appear more attractive. The impact of the loss of employment land and the effect on the area is devastating. Our residents are justifiably concerned and indeed angry about what is happening to our area. It has a negative impact on all our lives. It would have been preferable for the developers to adapt to proposals from local people instead of forcing plans on them. The new National Model Design Code says that local communities will be at the heart of plans to make sure that new developments in their area are beautiful and well designed. The adopted East Herts District Plan has a policy, DES1, which calls for collaborative master planning for significant sites, and that smaller schemes of under 50 dwellings may be significant by their impact on local character. This is a significant site locally, prominent and centrally located in the street with huge local interest. For a street of 100+ homes, there are 102 letters of objection with none in support. And yet, almost unanimously, people say that it's about the details and not the principle of development. It's not helpful that there has been a lack of independent scrutiny by design review. This should be mandatory for all major schemes. But this is an ideal opportunity for East Herts District Council to show developers that times are changing, that people demand excellence, and also to be engaged fully and properly, that the old ways of proposal, consultation and resubmission, which is what has happened here, do not work satisfactorily and are simply too adversarial. Many houses on Tamworth Road are in the conservation area. Residents have been unable to obtain planning permission for work on their own houses, and many don't have their own off-road parking spaces or garages. Yet they are now expected to endure a huge overdevelopment which is out of keeping with the road and could result in an additional 200+ new residents, potentially doubling the population of an historic road. There is a demand locally for family houses, not for flats, and the development of houses in keeping with the road would be desirable, which this is not. There's been no attempt to integrate the final Victorian buildings. This is contrary to policy HA2. Heritage interest has been recognised by the Council's conservation team, the county archaeologist and the Victorian Society. The National Design Code C2 says that the site design codes can include guidance on saving heritage assets. It is regrettable that the proposal is only for purely residential properties with no employment space or anything non-residential. This is contrary to East Herts District Plan Policy ED1. Mixed-use schemes reduce the need to travel, improve social cohesion, support walkability, and add to the character of the area. The original application included retention of some offices, but was dropped, and there is no mention of a mixed-use option in this report. Climate change policies require integration of green infrastructure within the site, but there is hardly any green space. There is no use of renewable energy, no air source or ground source heat pumps, but gas boilers, which will have to be ripped out in a few years. No street trees are provided, although the National Model Design Code guidance promotes them in new developments for habitat, shading, cooling, air quality improvements, and carbon sequestration, as well as being a vital component of attractive places. The scheme also fails to reuse materials within existing buildings or retain embodied carbon, which is contrary to policy CC1. Sustainable drainage is poor. SUDS, Sustainable Urban Drainage Systems, is a planning condition yet to be determined, but the intensity of layout does not allow for more green space. There is no rainwater harvesting, no green roofs, no green walls, yet this is a site in an area of high surface water risk, contrary to policy WAT5. Local residents are seeking greater measures for climate resilience to address extreme weather and flooding. The raised floor levels for some units are not of an inclusive design and will be obstructive for the disabled, paragraph 8.34 in the report. It is a requirement of the Environment Agency, but with a master plan, it could hopefully be addressed by the full provision of SUDS. It is a concern that if these floor levels are above those of existing homes in Tamworth Road, it's a suggestion that no other homes are safe. You will have noted for yourselves the density of housing and the unacceptable height of the proposed elevations. The report has accepted the overshadowing and overlooking impact on some of the local residents, especially on the Springs and Meadow Close, yet considers it acceptable. It is not if you live there. Some of the proposed conditions are unviable, imposing restrictions that will not be realistic to enforce in the future. Is the council setting itself up to fail in the future, as with the parking issues at Liberty Rise? We are surprised and shocked that Herts County Council highways are not prioritising walking and cycling, but support continued rat running on back streets like Tamworth Road, as to restrict this will impact on other roads, paragraph 5.12 of the report. The priority is wrong and contrary to the local transport plan. They failed to address the issues and suggestions made in the Ware Road traffic survey. Instead, they state an intention to spend the monies on a scheme out of the ward at Hertford East Station with no details of which have been disclosed. The parking problems in the area are well documented. Many of the current dwellings rely on-street parking on Tamworth Road, which is already inadequate. Commuters from Hertford East Station car park, commuters from Hertford East Station park in this area and other nearby roads to avoid parking costs and to walk to the station. The proposed drop curb improvements and increased turning space for access of refuse, emergency service and delivery vehicles will result in the loss of even more on-street parking spaces, as will moving the access road. The reduction in the number of parking spaces for the development, the expectation that future residents would only use the tandem parking and garage space allocated to them is unrealistic. The more reasonable assumption is that they will park in the most convenient space and use garages for storage, working or living space. It is inevitable that future residents and visitors will park on roads, causing more of a problem on the highway than the area is currently experiencing. Existing residents should not be disadvantaged by the impact of overspill parking, as they have been from other developments in our area. Yet despite the requests, the provision of a residence parking zone had not been agreed, although I believe there has been some last-minute negotiation on this matter. Officers have accepted the historic errors of the original parking decisions at nearby Liberty Rise, which cannot now be rectified. This has resulted in vehicles parking dangerously on Ware Road and adjacent streets. They park on pavements, near junctions, they block access points, necessitating pedestrians, often with buggies or mobility aids, having to walk into the road to get around parked cars. I cannot emphasize enough that it is a very dangerous situation. The problems have resulted in many accidents, some of them serious, and include a child being knocked over and underneath a car. The residents have a real fear of the impact of the knock-on health and safety dangers of this development and dread the terrible possibility of it causing a fatality on our roads. The affordable housing provision for the development, as you've already heard, is only one house out of 49 properties, just 2% provision, with a commuted sum to be used elsewhere in the district. Originally, the housing officer had said it began with 17 flats or 35% provision. This is far short of the adopted policy of 40% or 20 dwellings. There has been no sight of the viability assessment, which should be made public in a summarised form to protect business confidentiality to understand what is happening, and this is contrary to policy HOU 3. The Section 106 monies offer very little to Tamworth Road or to Kingsmead Ward. There is a proposal for £350,000 funding to a proposed new school in Ware. However, residents in Kingsmead are unlikely to be eligible to attend the school even if they wish to travel there. The conditions suggest that additional monies can be spent elsewhere in the whole district. How can that be? It's appalling and insupportable. So please hang on, I'm nearly there. I'm coming up to my summing up now. So there has been no provision for a residence parking zone, a quiet way or landscaping, public realm measures to enhance Tamworth Road. They offer no employment or communal space. There is no financial support for work or projects within Kingsmead Ward. Indeed, there's no benefit for Kingsmead at all from this development, just the prospect of aggravation of more building work, more residents, more problems with parking and dangerous roads and less employment space. There is no GP surgery in the area, no public amenities, one small primary school, yet we are expected to accommodate up to another 200 plus residents without any improvements to the local infrastructure. The public transport system is inadequate. The increased number of residents, especially families, will need vehicles to access work, education, shopping, leisure and medical facilities. The pressures on our area are disproportionate and unacceptable. This development is contrary to policy DES1. Relative to its existing industrial appearance, the design has been improved, but overall this proposal is not of a high enough design quality due to the loss of heritage, lack of green space, SUDs, limited amenity of many units, not least Block E. I would encourage members to refuse this application, please. I would also urge the committee to consider requesting funding for a local design code or master planning exercise for this site immediately. The aim should be to produce a site design code for adoption within a few months, which would assist a speedier next stage for the applicant. Members, I thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bolton. So now is the moment when we throw the discussion open to the floor. I've seen a hand already, Councillor Beckett. I'm wondering whether there's anything that's been said already that the presenting officer might want to talk to first, or we just go straight into members' questions. Perhaps we'll go into members' questions and then we'll see where that takes us. So I've got Councillor Beckett, Councillor Redfern and Councillor Ruffles in that order, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first couple of questions. The first one is relating to the LPZ. If I'm right in hearing, Rachel, you said that one's been negotiated last minute, and I'm assuming that will mitigate the pressures of commuter parking on Tamworth Road, obviously notwithstanding the extra residents. And my second question is regarding flooding. So best practice is to have no more water runoff from a site post-development than there is pre-development. Having had a look at the site, it's virtually all hard standing, so it would be hard to imagine there'd be greater runoff from the site post-development. But have we had any calculations to demonstrate that? Thank you.
Apologies, I muted myself. Councillor Redfern. Thank you, Councillor Beckett.
Yeah, I can see, thank you, Chair. I can see that a lot of officer work has gone into this planning document, and I'm quite happy with the mitigations for climate change have been taken into account with solar panels and EV charging and broadband connection. And I'm really pleased to hear about the 45% reduction in carbon. However, there are two main issues that I really struggle with. One of the most depressing paragraphs I've ever read in a planning document is paragraph 8.21 on page 36. The level of affordable housing would be considerably less than the up to 40% set out in policy housing 3. The words considerably less, to be clear, mean 38% less than the 40% to which we aspire. Instead, this seems to have been sacrificed to providing financial contributions. Can I just let you know that I have personal experience as a child of living in unsuitable accommodation? And can I tell you that going to a beautiful school and having up-to-the-minute services of all kinds would never replace the need for a suitable home? I find this very hard to come to terms with, to be honest. The offer of 142,000, even the revised figure for affordable homes of 343,539, how many affordable houses is that going to supply? I'd like an answer to that question. And where? The second main issue I have is the proposed parking provision. I understand all the reasons stated as to why it is being reduced, and I think one important issue has been forgotten. The present residents of Tamworth Road use the present industrial area as an overnight car park when they return from their work. The change of use will result in just more pressure in Tamworth Road. Add to this just a handful of vehicles that may not be accommodated in the new development, and suddenly there is a big problem. And I'm not sure even the parking zone can deal with that. The district plan states in paragraph 18.4.2 of vehicle parking provision, quote, "It is important to ensure that they," I think that means restrictions in parking provision, "do not lead to displacement parking in other areas." I think that this development will lead to displacement parking, and this has not been properly addressed. And finally, maybe a question of taste, but I feel the design of blocks B and D to be extremely out of sorts with the remainder of the area. I'm left wondering why the design of these blocks has to reflect the character of the existing granary building. What is the point of reflecting an industrial building which will have been removed? Would it not be better to be in keeping with other buildings that remain in the vicinity? So that's all. That's three main issues I have with this thing. And, you know, I know there's been an explanation about affordable housing, but I find it unacceptable. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redfern. Councillor Ruffles.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I've listened very carefully to all that's been said and written by our officers and by the applicant and in the reports, and I shall continue to listen because I think this is probably early on in the debate. But I have to say that I am very uneasy about the application. I respect the work that's been put into it up to this point, a very great deal, and improvements have resulted. But I really don't think we are there yet. I don't think this is good enough. I am disappointed, as others will have been, that the various formula lead a recommendation that we should accept just one affordable house on the site itself. I know about the commuted sum elsewhere, and yet for that that great concession under our rules, really, there's no reflection of extra care to really maintain or enhance the setting of the adjacent area. The conservation area in particular, although that has been better treated in these last drawings, and it doesn't alternatively restore a sort of genuine feel to the site, the heritage aspect of it, and that's just been touched on a moment ago by Councillor Redfern. Instead, what we have are town houses which we are told in the report are made to look like grain stores and industrial buildings, only bigger. And that does seem to me to be a very great pity. Chairman, it's worth reminding ourselves, paragraph 8.63, that the whole town of Harford's conservation area was recently reappraised 3 or 4 years ago, and the setting into which this application seeks to impose itself was not pruned out of the conservation area by the appraiser, but deliberately and pointedly added to it. In his eyes, it was that important, a rare feature in that exercise of 2017. Now, in this application, I accept that there has been some very good progress with the Tamworth Road frontages, which are now very much more appropriate than previously. But my concern is about the whole block of development which is being imposed on this site opposite the conservation area and very much part of it. Paragraph 847 reminds us that good relationships between new and existing developments is one of the main underlying themes of the well-designed places guidance in the National Planning Framework. And so our duty in assessing planning applications is to see that all opportunities are taken to maintain or enhance a conservation area. And here, Chairman, is that opportunity. And while recognising all the work which officers and the applicant have undertaken to get this far, I'm unable to warmly bless these proposals for either enhancing the built quality of the site to the level of its surroundings opposite and around, nor for making careful plans to honour the 100-year-old long previous character of the land. So my question to officers is about our options tonight here as a committee. What courses are open to us to achieve a residential development at this site which better respects its setting and its street neighbours opposite, and which also advises the applicant about exactly how the granary building, for example, can be usefully retained for one purpose or another on the site. Because I don't want Harford and Tamworth Road area in particular to become like so many bland built places devoid of real historic footprint and interest for future residents and students and visitors to the Tamworth Road area. So where can we go this evening, Chairman?
Thank you very much, Councillor Ruffles. Now, there are 2 more hands coming up, but we'll let the officer respond to the questions raised so far before we get to Councillors Kay and Crystal. Rachel, if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, so just to follow up on Councillor Beckett's comments regarding the residential parking zone. So yes, you'll have seen in the late representations that we have secured £20,000 contribution towards implementation of a residence parking zone, but I have to add here that a residence parking zone, it operates outside of the planning system. So ultimately, a formal consultation has to occur with residents and nearby businesses. So residents have the opportunity at that point in time to decide whether or not that's something that they would like in their area. Having spoken to the parking team, they felt that a £20,000 contribution would be needed, because it's likely that off the back of any consultation, they may have to look at a much wider area to incorporate into a residential parking zone. And then in terms of your comment regarding flooding, so accompanying the planning application is a flood risk assessment. That document sets out runoff rates, and I believe that the runoff rates do conclude that it would be basically a greenfield site because of the drainage that they've got on site. We've obviously consulted with the Environment Agency as well as the lead local flood authority, who don't object to the application subject to conditions, hence why there are a number of conditions regarding drainage included within the report. And then in relation to Councillor Redfern, so the comment regarding affordable housing, so the commuted sum, so obviously that has been increased to the £343,539. Having spoken to the housing officer, they would like the opportunity for that money to be spent, in the district, and it wouldn't necessarily go to this particular site, but I guess we would need to have sort of further discussions, sort of at Section 106 stage, whilst that was being finalised. We could have further discussions to see, precisely where that money could be spent. But that's the situation at this point in time. They're just happy to have the one unit on the site, and then the commuted sum as an addition. And then in respect of the parking, so I think, so you touched on the point that existing residents are utilising the application site for overflow car parking, essentially. I would just say that, this is private land. It's not a car park, so residents can't rely on that moving forward. There'll be nothing stopping the owner of that site from, putting hoarding up, and then, that would be the end of sort of any parking there. I appreciate that there is sort of on-street parking. However, the proposals do include parking spaces for all the properties that would comply with policy. Was there any other points in relation to your parking comment that you want me to explain or to answer, Councillor Redfern?
I just feel that it's not been. I know that the overflow parking on the site at the moment is unofficial, but nevertheless it is real. And if that cannot happen, then there'll be more on-road parking. So it will only take a few cars extra, which will create grave problems, I think. I know that it complies with the parking regulations. I happen to think that I don't really think those parking regulations are adequate, because they assume that people won't own a car if they don't need it to get to work. But actually, most people who work probably have to use a car to get there because they don't work on the doorstep. So I'm very unhappy about that. That's all. Thank you.
If I could just come in, I think David Snell wants to comment. So I've got your hand over. I'll come to you in just a couple of seconds. I think it's quite important that for this entire debate, we do face up to the fact that what regulations are the regulations, and that is the context in which we must consider this application. And indeed, we must consider this application for what this application is, and be careful to distinguish this application from wider issues that may apply in the town of Hertford. David Snell, you wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to put perhaps a bit more meat on what commuted sums are used for. Essentially, they're used by the council when we get commuted sums from development in lieu of affordable housing. Essentially, they're used as grant aid funding for affordable housing schemes. Quite often, that's 100% housing schemes by housing associations, usually local housing associations. So just to clarify that point, and then just on the point made by Councillor Ruffles, you very much must consider the application as submitted. Clearly you have an opportunity to defer consideration, but in terms of seeking changes to it, you really you have to consider the application before you. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know whether, Rachel, you were going to come back with something. I see your hand, Victoria. I'll come to you in a second.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to basically say exactly what David's just said in relation to the application that's before us. But just then, I think Councillor Ruffles was touching on about the granary building and the retention of the granary building. I would say that, you know, I've been out to the site, I've been inside the building. The conservation officer has also, you know, attended the site and has also been around the building as well. Within the officer report, we did suggest that, you know, could the building be retained, but it's quite clear when you're within the building that the building has been altered significantly over the years, and as a result of that, you know, any sort of heritage has been sort of diminished sort of over time. I don't know, Kieran, if you have anything that you want to add to that.
Yeah, on that point, the building is not capable of a straightforward conversion due to the floor to ceiling heights being quite low. I was very much of that mindset when I did my site visit. I was hoping to be able to find a way of converting it, and it just didn't. It would be very complex, and what you'd end up doing is further diminishing its significance through punching new windows and new openings in that lined up with modern floor heights. So it wasn't something that I felt was an option in this case, which was disappointing, but that was the position I found, and I felt that given that that consideration, I didn't feel that we could ask them to retain that building.
Thank you, Kieran. Looking for hands. Victoria, I think it's right we take officer contribution to help us with the debate. Victoria.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was really just to endorse what yourself and David said, and just put the legal stamp on it to say that obviously members are here to determine the application that's before them and not to defer into other areas. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move back to members' questions. I'm afraid I didn't see which of Jonathan Kay and Ben Crystal had their hands up first.
I believe Councillor Kay was first, but it doesn't really matter too much.
Oh, that's fine. Councillor Kay's first, then Councillor Crystal, and then Councillor Kemp, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have a certain amount of sympathy of what's been said by some councillors so far. Lack of green space is one of them. And also the fact that, you know, they're knocking down the existing building, so it doesn't need to look like the existing building. I have a certain amount of sympathy with what Councillor Ruffles and Redfern said in terms of keeping the look within the area. Having said that, this is not in a conservation area. Close to one, yes, but not in a conservation area. And we are in the 21st century, so it doesn't mean that every, you know, the house has to look sort of Victorian and early 20th century, but nonetheless it still needs to, you know, look attractive and perhaps be in keeping with the surrounding areas to a certain extent. I just wanted to really ask a question about the parking. Perhaps the officer can explain a bit more about what a tandem parking arrangement is. And also on the electric vehicle parking, I know there is electric charges for the houses. You talk about a shared electric charger for the apartments. Does that mean just one charger for 17 apartments? And if that is the case, bearing in mind we're going to have electric cars in 10, 15 years' time, being compulsory if we want a new car, you know, there'll be a lot of residents competing for the one charger, if that is the case, or is it a few chargers? Perhaps you can just explain a bit more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Ben Crystal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with a lot of things that have been said already. One of the things that puzzles me is why there was no master planning on this, and I was just curious, not specifically on this, but so the rule is 50 and above, but not 49. Is that right? So that was my kind of small question. I'm like Peter. I'm deeply concerned by the loss of the granary and the mill. These are locally rare industrial buildings. They may not be of national significance, but they are of real heritage value. And I kind of think that, you know, surely planners learnt in the 60s and 70s what happens when we strip out all of the heritage buildings in our towns and cities, and you end up with communities that are all the more poorer in cultural terms for that loss. And so I'm kind of very surprised that we've got to this point. I'm disappointed to hear the conservation officer say that because it's been mucked about with internally, that's a reason why we shouldn't worry about conserving it. You know, look at loads of. I lived on a Grade 2 listed house that was completely mucked about inside, but that's not the point. It's about preserving its external appearance is as much as anything. I'm also, I mean, I think that loss of the heritage structure within this development kind of then knocks on to creating these problems that we see of overdevelopment. It does feel like this design that the application has is just too dense. And that, of course, as other councillors have said, that leads to the parking issues, the lack of the green space. So there are some good things. I'm glad to see the carbon reduction of 45% above Part L. But if you take the solar panels off, actually the houses just meet building regs, and so they'll still be as cold in winter and as warm in summer, over hot in summer as any other new houses. So the houses themselves haven't really gone down that fabric first approach beyond building regs. So even that's double-edged. Yeah, I struggle to see the process that has gone through to reach where we are. Just feels like it hasn't worked, and all of those issues, parking, lack of space, too many houses, reflects that. And I think I take Councillor Kay's point about, you know, that it doesn't have to reflect the conservation area. But I think condition 37 says, you know, we've got to look carefully at how we put the solar panels on because of the conservation area across the road. Well, you know, you can't have it both ways. You've either got to pay attention to the conservation area, or you know, you just do whatever you want. I really think that this is a mistake in the process, and that we've got something that doesn't work because of that. So my only real question was, what, you know, master planning, why 50, why not 49?
Thank you, Councillor Crystal. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this application seems to raise a lot of complex and quite interlinked issues. The first is the loss of employment space, which I think is generally regrettable. On the other hand, this is a non-designated area. The area is predominantly residential, and one has to look at it, and I looked at it and thought to myself, if we were actually going to introduce an employment space, an industrial space into this area now, would it be accepted? It would probably be objected to quite strongly because it doesn't look a particularly sustainable site. Linked to that is the buildings on the site, and most of them, frankly, do not seem to have any great architectural merit to them. I am sorry to see the loss of the Hertford Town Granary, because that is really a very interesting and I thought attractive vernacular building. But I looked at it very hard and I just could not see any way that I could imagine it could be converted into something useful. Quite apart from the floor to ceiling heights and things, there are actually relatively few windows. And if you actually converted it into apartments or houses, you would have very little or relatively little natural light inside. It seems as if you'd really have to rebuild it from scratch in order to produce and completely change the appearance and design to get something that was usable. The only other likely use would be something like a warehouse or whatever, but if it's not going to be an industrial site, it's hard to see any potential use for that. So the other angle on the industrial side is that the company that owns it is going to consolidate with its other site on Mead Lane, so employment won't be lost there. The other companies don't seem to have actually raised an objection to the planning application, and that suggests they think they can find alternative premises elsewhere. The point about parking, I think, is a very valid one, and I'm really very suspicious of tandem garages where supposedly you'd have one car parked behind another. I think past experience and common sense suggests that's not what's going to happen. What will happen in practice is that the back half of the garage gets used for storage of various things, and there's just one car parking space. And I question whether there is anything in policy TRA3 vehicle parking provision and the supplementary planning document that either permits or objects to tandem parking like this, because I don't think it's really a realistic use of parking space. As far as the appearance goes, I think the developers haven't done themselves any favour with the poor quality of the drawings that they showed showing the elevations, which makes them look as if they're in dull grey concrete, whereas some of the colour elevations that accompanied them looked rather more acceptable. In terms of the frontage onto Tamworth Road, the eastern part of Tamworth Road isn't a conservation area. I looked at the housings there, and they seem to be mainly notable for their considerable variety, but I didn't think that the new ones looked as if they would be out of keeping with that variety. Finally, and the thing that I thought most important of all originally, was the affordable housing provision. And I think all of us are very disappointed that it's below the 40%, and did ask the question as to why this was the case and why the viability assessment came out as it was. But this is a brownfield site, and in both policy and principle, one could say that that should be preferable to a greenfield site that would actually impinge on unspoilt countryside. Now, the viability assessment's been done, and the planning officer has put details into the additional representation summary, which suggests the reason is the additional costs associated with preparing a brownfield site and the loss of existing income. So I'd just like to ask a couple of further questions on that. Whether this is a typical situation for brownfield sites compared to greenfield sites. And secondly, now that we have the good news that the affordable housing provision has been increased from £143,000 to £343,000, does this change the situation in terms of how many affordable houses could actually be accommodated on site? Rather than just one lonely 3-bedroomed house, could we have 2 or 3 or more? And I'd actually like to repeat a question that Councillor Redfern asked earlier on, which is how many affordable homes would that sum of £343,000 equate to in this development, specifically regarding the 3-bedroomed homes? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kemp. I'm going to invite officers to comment. Just before I do, Councillor Crystal, your hand is still up. Is that because you didn't take it down? It's up again, is it? Okay, well, we'll come back to you and Councillor Stowe and Councillor Buckmaster once officers have had a chance to comment. So I think, Rachel, we'll look to you in the first instance.
Yeah, so just to explain, so the tandem parking arrangement is where you have one car parked behind the other. So in this instance, blocks A, B, and D have garages at ground floor level. Block A on the left of the site has one car parking space in a garage and then one in front within a driveway effectively, whereas blocks B and D have like a tandem garage effectively, whilst the Block C, which is one unit in the middle, has 2 spaces in front of it. So yeah, basically the parking provision is one behind the other. There is an example of similar properties near Hertford East train station. I can't remember the exact location, unfortunately, but a similar scenario is there, where they have their only parking spaces are within garages. I would also add that these particular garages are large in size. So the council has car parking standards, which I've set out in the report. These are well in excess of that, in order to accommodate not only 2 vehicles potentially, but also to allow for storage within the garages as well. So they are bigger than most garages you would find. In terms of the vehicle charging points, so yes, all dwelling houses will have access to a vehicle charging point. The flats will initially have a shared charging point. However, we would expect the infrastructure to be sort of implemented so that when and if additional charging points are required, they can be sort of tapped into and additional points can be put in the future. We call the active spaces, obviously the ones that have the charging points, and then the inactive ones would be obviously things that you can tap in at a later point in time. In response to Councillor Crystal, in relation to the master planning query, so in relation to this application, so the site isn't strategic. It would be considered a windfall site, and it was deemed at the time that because of the number of units that was proposed on the site, that it wouldn't fall within the master plan policy definition. So hence why master planning wasn't put forward on that site. Notwithstanding that, the application, I'm aware that the applicants have tried to engage with members of the public sort of on their own, and then obviously through the course of the planning application, the consultation process has been undertaken. A number of consultations have happened, and in addition, we have engaged with the steering group, where members have been invited to review. When I say review, the look at the scheme that's been proposed, and that did include other stakeholders who were also involved in that. And then I think the next queries would be from Councillor Kemp. So in relation to your query about viability on greenfield versus brownfield sites, I would just try to explain that in my experience with greenfield sites, because there's basically nothing on them, there's less costs involved in that, and hence you normally are able to achieve the full 40% affordable housing, and that has been evidenced on the Hart 3 site, for example. I'm not saying that is always the case. There may be some anomalies, but generally I'd say that greenfield sites are easier in terms of viability. Brownfield sites, for example, so the recent cases that we've had would be at Birchley Green, where councillors would be aware that unfortunately that scheme was unviable and no affordable housing could be provided on that site. And then in addition, we have the Hart 2 site on Marshgate Drive, where again that was an unviable scheme. However, in that instance, the applicant did offer 15% affordable housing, and that that was achieved on that site, but that was only because the developers offered that as part of the application. And in terms of the commuted sum amount, I don't have the details to tell you how much that would contribute towards a unit, and therefore I don't know how much the new commuted sum would, but it would maybe something that we could discuss with housing if members are minded to approve the application, or alternatively there may be a case for deferral on that matter.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Can I just, before we come to members, just on the strength of what you've just said, can I just interject with a couple of clarifications? Just to be clear, on the proposal, does the parking element of the proposal, in your view, comply or not comply with our policy?
I would say it complies. We don't have any guidance in relation to the types of parking spaces, so tandem spaces would be acceptable.
Thank you very much. And then my last tiny point before we come to members again. You made a reference to, in terms of Councillor Kaye's observation, recharging points. You commented to the effect that that might be a work in progress going forward. We appreciate the sentiment of that, but of course, I'm sure there are some members on this conversation that might be a little sceptical about what may or may not happen going forward. So the question is, could we strengthen conditions and requirements in relation to charging points now? So it's not a question of just seeing how it unfolds as time passes?
I think that's certainly something that we can put to the developer. I'm sure they'd be able to provide some additional active points for the flatted element of the development.
Okay, thank you. So now it's come to members. We're going to take Ruth Buckmaster first, and then Tony Stowe, and then Ben Crystal again, please. So Councillor Buckmaster.
Chairman, just before we do, can we just check that David Andrews and Richard Van are actually still here? Because they're on the screen, but we can't see them. Can they still hear? And are they in the meeting still? Can we just check that, please?
Very fair point. Can we just have some proof of life from Councillor Fernando and Councillor Andrews, please? Yeah, look at that. Yeah, always a picture of you as well, David. Thank you very much. Okay, very well made point, Peter. And I might just say that we'll take these 3 questions and then have officers' responses, and then we'll maybe think about having just a break for 5 minutes to stretch weary legs.
David Snell had his hand up a while ago.
Sorry, Tony?
David Snell had his hand up a while ago.
Okay, should we take? We'll take David first then, because it might be in the discussion.
It's okay, Bob. You covered it with your questions to Rachel, so that the matters I was going to deal with.
Okay, thank you. All right, Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chair. I've had several questions about this application, and actually the most of them have already been asked about the granary building and the affordable housing. But something that's just come up that's occurred to me, you've talked about tandem parking. I've actually lived in a house that had tandem parking, and in reality, it isn't practical with having to go out and move cars around. But what did concern me was following on from Councillor Kaye's question on the charging points. You've said every house will have a charging point. Is that only one electric charging point? Because if you have tandem parking, you're then restricting those families to having, how many electric cars can they have? Because how will they park them to charge them? So I just want to query how many charging points for the houses as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckmaster. Can't remember which way around I put you now. Tony Stowe. Yeah, Councillor Stowe. Thank you.
Peter suddenly jumped on the screen. I was trying to unmute Peter. It's just really a point of clarification. I'm concerned about the properties that overlook the railway, and I've looked at the plans, and a lot of the houses and I think the flats as well have bedrooms facing the railway. Now, I noticed in page 56, 8.87, you talk about environmental health officers reviewing the noise assessment, including things like acoustic glazing, air bricks, ventilators, and they also worry about vibration. Now, and I also see you've got a condition 19 on page 73, mentions it, but I don't know whether it goes far enough, you see, and I just feel that those bedrooms that face the railway, because of the noise element, we talk about double glazing on the houses and the flats generally, but why not have triple glazing to protect it from the noise of the garage? Now, could this be strengthened a bit to make sure that the developer is mindful of that? You know, because it's not very nice if you're working up every night with trains coming in. That's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony, very much. Councillor Crystal.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it was a comment from, I think, Councillor Kemp reminded me about employment. I think one of the other disappointing things about this was, I think, as someone else mentioned, a lack of co-working opportunities here. And that reminded me about policy ED1. I was a bit puzzled. Policy ED1 part 3 requires that there are three requirements met to allow the loss of an employment site, and I think a non-designated employment site. So A and C appear to be met. Point B, I think, is that it's confirmed use as an employment site cannot be facilitated by partial conversion to housing, and I didn't see that addressed within the officer's report explicitly. So I just wondered whether Rachel, you could address that. I'm sorry to send more questions. So it was about ED1 part 3B having been met. And another question, I understand that parking is short. It's not short, it meets the council's policies, but it kind of is tight. But so I just wondered whether there is an opportunity here for 1 or 2 spaces of the visitors parking to be given over to an electric car club. So the reason is that electric car clubs help residents reduce the need for second and third cars, because they have a shared vehicle or 1 or 2 shared vehicles on site, and that's county highways agree with that. So I just wonder whether there is also the opportunity to look at putting in a 2-space electric car club, for example. You could get in a social enterprise like Co-Wheels Car Club would come in and then run it for the site. So I wonder if in the long run that might be a good option to help reduce car use and issues with parking.
Thank you. Councillor Kay has just put his hand up again, so I'm going to let you in, Jonathan, before officers respond.
Yeah, it's just a quick one. As somebody who asked about tandem parking and Councillor Buckmaster raised it, I suddenly realised that I've got tandem parking where I live, and actually it is doable. You know, you have one in the drive and one in the garage, and you have to make sure that you work out who's taking the car tomorrow and that sort of thing. But it is manageable. And I've also got an electric car, and you only need 1 charger, because if you have got 2 cars and they both happen to be electric at the moment, that's probably unlikely. Then if the charger is outside the garage, that car charges, and then you switch the cars around and do that. And usually it's rare that you need to have both cars charging every single night. So that is manageable too. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I've also, Rachel, just before you come back, David Andrews has put his hand up. So there's a conversation developing here. Let's take David.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I don't seem to have a hand facility. I've been searching for it rather frustratedly. Yeah, this is undoubtedly a challenging application, and it was always going so to be. I'm broadly minded to agree with it, but I have to say we seem to be getting an increasing number of compromises. We seem to be compromising at every level about everything, and that is beginning to challenge my ability, and it's bumping me out of my comfort zone around this application. We're told it's not viable for supported housing. We're told that the car parking is suboptimal. We're told that yeah, it would be nice to put in future-proof the heating systems. Are going to have gas boilers, which will cause chaos in 12 to 15 years' time when it's all going to be ripped out. Right across the piece, there's a compromise on the design. There's a compromise on the gardens. I do take some comfort. I'm less concerned than Councillor Stowe about the railway. Trains at that point are rather going very slowly because they're just about to come into the station, or they're accelerating rather gently. away from it. So yeah, there will be noise. A railway generates noise, but it's not. I don't think I'd be particularly perturbed by that. But all the way through this, we're hearing about compromises over this, compromises over that, and as I say, it's beginning to get to the point where one more compromise, and I think it'll break the camel's back for me. I'm less concerned about car clubs. I salute Councillor Crystal. Actual fact, members of this committee will recall that many times over the years we've had car clubs, and strangely, or perhaps not strangely, they've always been in Hertford. And virtually every development that's taken place in any size in Hertford, the car club has come up, and we actually had one in a development not many hundreds of yards from where this is, and it just had no legs. It went nowhere. For some reason, they don't seem to live up to the promise. But you know, I am concerned that we're taking this forward, and we need to look at it in a little bit more detail. I think the officers have done a fabulous job. The report is good. When I went to the site, I was able to recognise a lot of the concerns and a lot of the issues because the officers have brought them into the report. But at this moment, I'm very finely balanced. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David, very much. David Snell.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to deal with Councillor Stowe's point and condition 19 regarding the railway noise. I haven't got the noise assessment in front of me, which the condition relates to, but essentially, Councillor Stowe, the condition is requiring the development to achieve the recommendations. Those recommendations are based on noise levels and what is acceptable and what it is not, and those are fairly standard to environmental health. And it's a question of what achieves that. It may be treble, it may be double. So it's one or the other, basically, but it's achieving the standard that is required. In terms of the tandem parking, just to really stress that there is no policy objection to tandem parking, either in the standards or the accompanying document. Tandem parking is fairly normal in modern developments, and indeed they have been shown on quite a few of the strategic site developments that you've recently considered. So that's just to clarify that point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, David, very much. Now, Rachel, as you've had 4 members speak since you last had the floor, so you may have something further to say.
Thank you, Chair. So just to follow up on Councillor Buckmaster's comments, which I think Councillor Kay partially addressed anyway, but my understanding is that each house would have one point. I guess we're fairly early on in sort of the people owning electric vehicles at this point in time, and obviously there is it does depend on what car you actually have as to what sort of adaptation you need to those units that would be implemented. I'm sure if someone had 2 cars that required charging, that you would be able to, add an additional charge into the house. So I think that would be met. Clearly, we're trying to future-proof these properties by them having a vehicle charging point. I think we're doing so at this point in time. Things are clearly going to evolve over time, and things may change, but houses do and will need to be adapted sort of generally. I don't think I need to come back on Councillor Stowe's point, because I think David Snell has addressed that. And then in relation to Councillor Crystal's comments in relation to, I think, policy ED1, and I think the question was solely in relation to part B of 3. So Yes, so the site is a non-designated employment area, so it has less protection than a designated employment area such as Mead Lane, for example. The developer has or did look at other uses. They obviously advertised the site to see if any other employment uses would go in. But it's also of note that under permitted development, some of these buildings could be converted without requiring planning permission. They may need to submit some form of prior approval application, but ultimately, because of sort of the relaxation in permitted development, it does allow for effectively non-employment generating uses, as well as sort of residential conversions to occur without any formal planning permission. And then I think in relation to the electric car club point, so you're right that hasn't been considered in this particular site. That's ordinarily something that is sort of relayed from County Council when they're looking at sort of their financial contributions and how they think things should sort of work. I would say that this is a relatively modest scheme at 49 units, and I think it would be unlikely that a scheme of this size would be able to support car club spaces. Notwithstanding that, I appreciate there will be other residents in the street of Tamworth Road and the surrounding areas that may also want to use it. But I think we have got some examples in Hertford now where the uptake hasn't been as strong perhaps as we'd have liked it to be. You may recall that there's I believe 6 spaces going in at Marshgate Drive on the Hart 2 site. There's already 2 spaces allocated on Marshgate Drive for the Smeaton Court development. And actually there's only 1 car that is actually accessible. The other space is just not used anymore. And then there are also 6 spaces going in at Birchley Green. So there are going to be quite a few car club spaces within the vicinity that residents can use. So I think it's probably unlikely that something here would be viable. And then I think I've covered everyone's comments. I don't think Councillor Andrews had any particular questions that he wanted a response on. But correct me if I'm wrong.
No, David will put his hand up if he disagrees with you. I think that's a comment, Rachel. Now, I'm just looking to see if there are any more hands. Sarah Saunders, I think, has put her hand up. Yes?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, a number of concerns have been raised, and I just thought it's probably a good moment just for me to remind you that if you still have a number of concerns, then it would be wrong of me not to draw you back to the district plan. And just to, in your considerations, if you are not minded to support this application, you need to be very clear on the policy basis and tying any reasons for refusal back to that. So I just want to remind you at that point. Obviously, you've got the officer report in front of you, and Rachel's answered a number of questions, drawing you back to that position in the report and the policies that the officer considers the application is compliant with. So just want to remind members, considering that a number of concerns have been raised, always go back to your district plan and be very clear in thinking those concerns through.
Thank you, Sarah, very much. Now, I know a couple of minutes ago I floated the idea of a break, but since I can't see any more member hands up, I think we'll keep going unless anybody really does want a break now.
Chair, not a break from me, but can I just jump on what Sarah said, and obviously just endorse the point that obviously if this is going away that members are looking to overturn an officer recommendation, then obviously you need to have very clear planning reasons linked back to policy, and I will probably jump in later on if there's any more sort of after the questions have finalised, just to give a little bit more advice if it is going that way. Thank you.
Okay, I've got 1 or 2 points, one of which actually will bring me back to you, Victoria. But Rachel, I'm interested in your comments, which are in the paper, about where we might be if this were to go on permitted development rights. So just educate or advise the committee. A permitted development right is what it says on the tin, namely the owner of the land can undertake a certain development without coming for planning permission. Firstly, is that a correct understanding? And if it is, if you apply that principle to this site, where would we end up? Would we end up with some development that we have less ability to control, and perhaps extremely importantly, where would that leave us with all the many financial contributions that are listed in your paper? Would they just disappear, or would we still get them? If I can leave that question with you, then I'll follow up with a question for Victoria.
Chairman, could I come in on that one, please?
Of course, David. Yes, apologies. Yes.
Essentially, as members will know, permitted development rights are being expanded all the time. And indeed, we've had a number of prior approval applications involving the conversion of employment buildings to residential use. I'm not saying that these buildings could easily convert, but there is permitted development opportunity to do so under permitted development rights. Yes, that does mean that you lose control. That is a permitted development right, and those permissions are granted by the development order and basically by central government. So we would lose a number of controls, particularly over design. And when things come to us under prior approval, there's a very limited number of issues that we can consider. Usually highways, implications, flood risk, contamination. Those are the main issues that we consider. We cannot consider all the issues as you do now with the planning application that are in the development plan. So that's the background to the permitted development situation, really. We've had a number of applications on similar employment sites where prior approval has been granted for conversion.
And insofar as you pick that question up, David, where would permitted development leave us in terms of Section 106 and any other monetary contribution?
You don't get them, basically, Chairman. That falls by the wayside. It is a permission without any without any handles, if you like. It's a permission without all the conditions that we impose, although you can impose conditions to an extent on prior approval notifications, but you certainly can't go down the Section 106 routes.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I do have a question for Victoria, but I see that we've got now 3 more member hands up. So I am actually going to come back to the issue of just having a 5-minute break. And I think if it's okay, we'll take it now. On my watch, it's 4 minutes to 9. Could I suggest that 4 minutes is probably a little bit brief? Perhaps we can come back at 9:05. Yeah. So we just all come back for 9:05 and we'll carry on then. Thank you very much, everyone. We've got 1 minute to go. Councillor Kay needs to rush back into his living room, I think.
Present and correct.
Thank you. Oh, I think we've just lost one member in the break.
It's
well,
definitely best to wait till we've got
oh,
the
really?
games.
Okay. Actually, I'm being a bit unfair. Jonathan's returned spot on at 9:05. Well done, Jonathan. Okay. So just to let everybody know, because everybody sees all these hands, I've got 4 member hands up, and I know that David Snell wants to speak. I'll let David go first because officer comments might inform questions and debate. So, David.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to Rachel's encouraged me to clarify slightly what I said about PD rights. What I'm not saying is that all these buildings could be converted to housing under PD. There may be some scope depending on what each building is used for, but they could certainly be converted under permitted development to other uses. So I'm not saying that they could be a complete housing development. We would have to look at the buildings and what they were used for and the legislation. Just to clarify that point.
Okay, thank you, David.
Thank you.
Right, some of these hands went up before the break, and I think one didn't. So to work it in reverse order, I think, Ruth, you put your hand up after the break, or you're the fourth hand. So you'll come fourth. We haven't heard from Rishi yet, so we'll let Rishi go first. We'll let Ben Crystal go second, and then Ian Kemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, David, for further clarifying. My point was in relation to permitted development rights. The committee has heard how buildings on the site which are of interest are not suitable to be retained for housing. And having seen the site externally, my view is any application under permitted PD rights would be for a far lower number of housing units than this application is for, as not all the units would be suitable for it. I appreciate there is a reduced amount of control, but as my colleague David Andrews stated earlier, this seems to be an application of compromises where it seeks to meet the minimum requirements to pass policy and not much more. Therefore, I do think it's just important to note that whilst permitted development is not ideal, it is in the developers and the landowners' interest to have an application that works for everyone, because whilst they may be able to develop some under permitted development, it would be on nowhere near as high a scope as this. So it's just really to note that comment with regard to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishi. I think I took Ben Crystal next, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry to come back again. I really following on from what Sarah said about this the Bible, and also what Rachel and David said about permitted development rights. I kind of, so my question about policy ED1, whether that section B was answered. The answer you gave me was that wasn't. I think it's fair to say, and I'm sorry if I'm wrong. It was fair. I think it's fair to say that you didn't answer, but what you said was they've got permitted development rights. And that appeared to be the answer. And so I can't help but feel that means that actually policy ED1 part 3 is kind of, it's being undermined, or it's not got teeth. It's not doing what it should be doing. And then, you know, we look at the affordable housing policy HOU3, and we see a development which should have what 18, 19 homes, but we can have one and a lump of cash, and that is policy compliant. The problem I have is that on the one hand, officers say, look, you know, this is what we work to, but on the other, it just feels to me again and again that this is not really doing the job. I suppose it's more of a kind of a philosophical question. I just struggle to see where we go with this. David, I'm sure you guys can explain, but I do struggle.
I'm going to take members first, David. So I've got your hand, but I'll come back to you. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it was very helpful for officers to point out the need for us to have firm grounds when if we're proposing objecting to the or turning down the recommendation, and in some cases it looks as if it's quite difficult to find those. The TRA3 vehicle parking provision one feels it ought to, you know, have some restrictions on a heavily tandem garage development. That's not stated explicitly for and against at the moment, but perhaps it's something that might be considered in policy or in a supplementary planning document. I think that looking at the site, a lot of the arrangements look quite sensible and reasonable, but I would have real concerns about blocks B and D as to whether you'd ever see the second of those double garage parking spaces being used. They would be better side by side, but if you were to do that, you would need a smaller number of buildings. So that would entail a significant rearrangement. But a number of points were also raised quite rapidly by the objectors right at the beginning. They quoted a number of specific policies. Some of those, I think, have been addressed. I'm not sure that all of them have, although in 3 minutes it was really rather a gallop. So I wonder if officers have any responses to other policies that were quoted as being possibly non-compliant areas by the objectors. And finally, regarding the affordable housing, I think it's been made quite clear, I think, what's going on there, and that it does look as if we want brownfield sites and not to have 49 homes built in countryside, but to be built in a brownfield area, that it does look as if there is some loss in terms of affordable housing or viability or other provisions. But Rachel suggested that it might be possible to renegotiate so that the enlarged provision in terms of money could be put towards having more houses on this site. I would very much welcome that if it could be done, particularly 3-bedroomed homes, which are really in fairly short supply generally, is my understanding, as regards affordable housing.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you. Councillor Buckmaster.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I started reading through the district plan because looking under policy HOU 3, point 4, where it says about the exceptional circumstances, because listening to everything tonight, I still could not see what was so exceptional that we were only being given one affordable house. And I know we've talked about this a lot tonight. So obviously with Councillor Kemp's comment about if it could be renegotiated, I would really, be very pleased if that could be looked into. But I also have one other question. And this is to do with condition 21, the construction management plan. As you know, locally on a development in our area, we are actually having problems with the developers because there is no construction management plan and they have actually started developing the site. So I'd like to know what guarantees we can have to actually, ensure that these conditions are met and held to by the developers.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Officers are sharing the load here, so I'll just ask officers to respond. David Stone has his hand up, so you can certainly take on the lead there, David.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could take some of those. In terms of affordable housing, what I will say to you, and I'll go back to the point that Rachel made, we are nearly always, not quite always, but nearly always successful in achieving 40% housing on our 40% affordable housing on our strategic sites. Those are the greenfield sites. There is sometimes an issue, but rarely. You'll know from considering those applications that they most often achieve the policy requirement. It is not so simple on sites that have already been developed and have buildings on them, because there are high costs involved and unknown costs to some extent in clearing those sites and dealing with, especially industrial sites, any contamination. This is a fairly long established industrial site and there will be contamination of some degree. In terms of viability review, I'll just briefly say the process. That viability reviews are done to principally a number of formula, but there's one formula that's used in particular under viability reviews, and they're used fairly nationally. It's a robust formula. And what happens is that the developer submits their viability review, and then we challenge it and review it with our own consultant, and we come to hopefully an agreement at the end. Those viability reviews are not simple, and they're quite complicated, but they are done to a mathematical formula and to nationally agreed costs, if you like, base costs or baselines. That includes a developer profit, which is normally accepted as being 20%. I can tell you that those reviews are robust. So when we come to you and say that a viability review has been undertaken, and we say that we feel that it is robust, that is the position, and that is the position of your own consultant, if you like. So it's not a position which we could easily defend at appeal, because it has been through our own independent consultant review. In terms of car parking, I accept and acknowledge what members have said, but at the end of the day, this proposal complies with car parking standards, so it complies with policy. In terms of drainage, I'm just trying to pick up a number of issues that have been raised in terms of the development plan. In terms of drainage, it is normal practice for applications of this type, in fact, larger applications as well, to put in a development strategy as their submission. So it's a strategy document that follows what they intend to do when more detailed proposals are prepared. So it is normal practice for us, on the recommendation of the lead local flood authority, to put those conditions on so that the detailed design comes later. That involves a considerable amount of work, considerable costs, and obviously developers aren't expected to outlay those costs with a degree of uncertainty of whether they're going to get planning permission or not. So it's quite reasonable to impose those conditions, and they're fairly standard wording. So you'll see the same wording recommended to you on all major applications. Just to go back to what Sarah says about going back to the development plan, it would be, in all honesty, rare for an application to comply with every single policy in your development plan. There are conflicts, there will always be conflicts in terms of assessing an application. But what you need to remember is, and your guide would be, in assessing against the development plan, it is the degree of harm overall. So whilst a proposal might not meet every wording of every policy in the development plan, you need to assess the degree of harm overall against the development plan policies overall. So what Sarah was basically saying was, if you are minded to refuse planning permission on any application, you need to assess the harm. So what is the reason for the objection, and what policy base that provides for to support that objection to that degree of harm, if you like. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, David. Okay, if I may, I've just got one or two questions for officers, and then I think we will see if we can move to a vote. My first question is for planning officers. Going back to an observation made in Ian Kemp's final contribution, quite rightly, he's reminded us that the speaker who spoke against, member of the public who spoke against this application, I think did identify 5 specific items from our own policy position, which she said ran counter to this application. And I think Ian Kemp is quite right to bring us back to that. So if I could just ask officers to run us through those 5 points, I think it was, we'd all be very grateful. And then I've got a couple of questions for our legal officer, Victoria.
Yes, I'll do my best. So I jotted down policies DES 4, HA2, and then I believe a couple of WAT policies, which would be the water policies. And then I've also included policy DES 1 and DES 3, as well as the MPPF. So I'll take policy DES 4 and the MPPF together, because I believe that they are sort of really surrounding the design aspect of the development. I feel that the report has, justified that the application would demonstrate high quality design. Clearly, design is a subjective subject. Everyone's going to have a different view on what is acceptable to them and what's not. But in this instance, I believe that the proposals accord with that. Policy DES 1, I think we've already touched on it this evening regarding master planning. And I've already explained that the reason the application hasn't gone through the master planning process is because it wasn't considered to be a significant proposal, and it also isn't an allocated site. But notwithstanding that, consultation has been undertaken, and the steering group meeting has been held with stakeholders and members. In relation to DES 3, sorry, just let me just make sure I've got the right policy. Would be to do with landscaping. I think it's clear to see that there would be some improvements in terms of landscaping on the site. There would be additional areas, whereas opposed to the current situation, it is largely hard standing. Therefore, it would enable some softening within the street scene with front gardens, as well as some additional spaces within the site. I appreciate they may not necessarily be huge open spaces, but if we look at the character and appearance of Tamworth Road, it is, relatively, small areas of soft landscaping in front gardens. And I wouldn't say that this would be out of keeping with that character. Plus, you also have large areas of open space within walking distance from this site, such as the Meads, as well as sort of play spaces for children at the end of the road, as well as obviously towards Harton Common as well. And then in relation to the policies WAT 1 and I think WAT 5 was mentioned. So that is to do with flood risk. It's considered that the application has addressed those issues and it would be compliant. We have comments received from the Lead Local Flood Authority and the Environment Agency, who raised no objection to the application subject to conditions of which they have been imposed on the application. And then I believe another policy reference was made to HA2, which is non-designated heritage assets. This, as we've already discussed, the application isn't within the conservation area. There are no buildings on the site that are designated as heritage assets, but the council would would need to sort of designate them as almost non-designated heritage assets. So in this instance, that policy wouldn't apply. I don't know, Kieran, if you've got any comments you'd like to make in relation to that.
Hi, yes. In terms of non-designated heritage, when we did we revised the Hertford Conservation Area appraisal in 2017, this site obviously wasn't included in that extension up Tamworth Road, and East Herts doesn't have a local list of listed locally listed buildings, so we don't have any way of formally recognising that in our current policy position. I would say in my response on this case, I did identify this as being of some local interest for its historic interest. But saying that, that is a limited interest, and I said due to the limited interest of these buildings, I agreed that because there was other issues on the site and they weren't capable of a straightforward conversion, I agreed that they could be demolished as long as the replacement buildings were of a high quality design and provided similar levels of legibility within the site.
Thank you, Kieran. And then I think there was just a final comment. I think it was regarding condition 21 and the construction management plan. So yeah, that has been imposed for details to be submitted. Clearly, during any construction, there is always an element of disturbance, but it's trying to minimise that. That condition should be discharge details should be submitted to the local authority prior to commencement of the development. I'd hope that the developer would, under due diligence, do that well in advance, so that those details are agreed. Should obviously permission be granted. Clearly, if they're in breach of that and we receive complaints in relation to that, then that would be down to enforcement to investigate, and whether or not they investigate and enforce, that would be down to them to do so.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. I've got two more members' hands. Then I think we will I'll just then get my questions into Victoria, and then we'll move into a vote. So Tim Page first, and then David Andrews second, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just coming back to what we're being told about robust viability calculations. Can you give me some understanding as to how the commuted sum for affordable housing went from 142,000 to 343,000 if we had such a robust calculation underway?
Yeah, I can answer that. So it's relatively straightforward. Basically, that sum of money has come from the contributions that were calculated by Hertfordshire County Council. So when they calculate contributions, they input the types of dwellings, so whether or not that's 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, and whether or not they're on the open market or affordable, and then that throws out a number in terms of the contributions that they would be seeking. In this instance, they'd included more affordable units than were being sought on the site. So effectively, the original sum that got incorporated into the Section 106 calculations that got inputted into the viability assessment was significantly higher, and when they recalculated it, that's why it got reduced down. And what we've done is we've taken that difference, because that was included within the viability. There's no reason why that money couldn't viably be allocated towards sort of affordable housing provision in the district, and then it wouldn't affect the viability of the scheme.
Just before I come to you, David, I am actually looking at Tim on the screen there. Looks just a bit quizzical. Are you happy with that response, Tim?
I think I reflect upon, because I'm still not entirely clear as to selling this as a robust system and actually coming out of it with such a large change.
Okay, Rachel, we'll just let David come in, see if he can elaborate on your answer.
Thank you, Chairman. Basically, as I said before, it's a formula that the consultants use, both sides, and what is inputted to that formula are all the costs associated with the development. So it might be land value, developer profit, remedial work costs, construction and materials costs, and the Section 106 contributions that have already been requested. So those all went into the original calculation. So those, what Rachel is saying is that those inputs as to monies which come off the residual land value were calculated wrongly by the county council. Their contributions towards sustainable transport and all the rest of it, they were calculated wrongly. So a higher figure than was necessary went into the viability formula calculation. However, the calculation at that point came out with the figures that were on your original report, but because they had already been inputted into the formula, it makes no difference to the actual formula. That money is still surplus. So you can, or we could, and the developer is willing to, add it on to the affordable housing. It could be added on to anything. Could be added on to sports and recreation, whatever. But in this case, it is surplus to the calculation, if you like. So it can be added to the affordable housing contribution. It's quite complicated.
Okay, thank you. I think you've explained it a bit clearer for me. But why has it come out as a late rep?
Because it's a change to your report, essentially, the original figures in the report.
Right, I think we've covered the ground. Tim, I can see you smiling, but I think we've covered the ground. So I'm going to move on to David and something really extreme. The last member comment of the evening.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, I think that conversation, the last few moments of this conversation, has demonstrated how officers have stayed firmly in touch with this all the way through, to the extent where, even here at the 11th hour, they are still working to achieve an equitable deal insofar as one can. I want to congratulate Councillor Bolton. I thought her comments were very, very helpful and useful. I'd like to support her to some extent in that if the committee were minded to accept this recommendation, I'm rather concerned that as this site is embedded in the heart of a residential area, which clearly has some concerns, that when it comes to setting out the terms and conditions for the construction, we recognise that there's going to be a lot of disturbance, a lot of dust, a lot of noise. We restrict the working hours accordingly. We recognise that there's going to be a great deal of inconvenience to the residents, and that officers take whatever steps are practical and reasonable to work with the developers to ensure that that is absolutely minimised, because we all know what happens. Come the day, demolition contractors come in, their job is rip it up, take it away. And they don't let anything get in their way. So we must be sure in our own minds that we support the residents, and we do all we can to make life as least uncomfortable for them as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Okay, just a quick one from officers then. Can David Andrews' concerns there be met? Were we to approve it?
That's noted, Chairman, and we will try to ensure that. It rather depends on the significance of the breach, but just to explain the power that we have, is essentially it's a breach of condition notice. So, and there's no right of appeal to a breach of condition notice. So it's a breach of condition notice. Failure to comply would result in prosecution. That is the route that we could go down. So, yes, we'll make sure that in consultation with the Highway Authority, consider the construction management plan carefully.
Okay, thank you very much. And then just finally from me, just a couple of questions for our legal officer, Victoria Wilder. As always, I'm concerned that the committee approaches any decision it makes in the right way, taking into account the right considerations. So I've just got one or two questions where your advice to us would be helpful, Victoria. My first, in fact, I've got three sets of questions. So my first set of questions relates to relevance. If I might just pick out one or two of the things that have been said this evening, there have been references to issues at Liberty Rise. There have been some references to possible works at Hertford East, or the frontage area of Hertford East train station. To what degree are those relevant to our considerations this evening, when, of course, as we do know, but we just need to keep reminding ourselves, we are dealing with a specific planning application per the papers in front of us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And obviously, this just elaborates on what I said earlier on in the committee, that obviously I cautioned the committee against straying off tangent while speaking about other areas that are outside of the application. So in answer to your question, the committee are determining this application tonight, and outside the application, so it does not have any bearing on their decision making tonight.
Thank you very much. My next set of questions then relates to policy. Now through the debate, and as usual, we've had a very good debate, good exchange of views. One or two members have passed comment to the effect that an existing regulation may be something that they're not very keen on, or an existing policy is something that maybe looking at it today seems a bit peculiar or whatever. But advise us, Victoria, am I right that for our purposes, in relation to this application this evening, we have to take existing regulations as existing regulations and our own policy as policy?
Yes, you're correct, Chair. Whilst they might not be acceptable to some members, or they might query them, they are the regulations, and they are the basis of which we need to consider them against this evening. Also, if the committee are sort of straying into that area and turn against officer recommendation and rely on these particular arguments, then there would be a risk on appeal that there would be an unreasonable behaviour on behalf of the council, and we might be subjected to costs if we detract from that policy.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm nearly there. And in terms of policy, and I'll identify my own understanding of this conversation, but it's extremely important that if I'm wrong, officers say so. But my understanding is that officers consider that the position per the paper and per the report this evening in relation to affordable housing does comply with our policy, that the position in relation to parking does comply with our policy, and that the position on the conservation issues also complies with our policy. Is that officers' view?
Yeah, should I go first? Because that's my understanding. Obviously, I'll divert to David and Rachel if they have anything to pick up on that, because it quite nicely links in with back to your second question. Because obviously, if officers are saying that it is policy compliant, if members are looking to detract from that, it's not going to sit well on an appeal whereby you have an officer saying that this is policy compliant, and then members are saying it's not when it's clear that it is, and that will tranche into the unreasonable behaviour and particularly subject to cost on appeal.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm taking
the answer is yes, Chairman. On those issues that you have recounted, the application is policy compliant.
Thank you very much. My final question, everybody will be pleased to know, to Victoria is that obviously in principle we have 3 options available to us on this application, as we do with any application. We have the application to approve the officer's recommendation. We have the possibility of deferring, and we have the possibility of voting to reject. Now, I think you advised earlier on, Victoria, and I think on previous occasions, we're very well aware of this, that if there were to be a move to reject, that does need to be supported on identified planning policy grounds. What would be the equivalent position in relation to a decision to defer? Specifically, if the committee were minded to defer, does it need clearly to identify the issues that it wishes to be looked at further, or does it defer in a vacuum? Victoria and David, whichever you wishes to go first.
Well, essentially, Chairman and committee, if you were minded to defer, essentially officers need to know the reason so that they can go back to the developer and discuss that issue with them. That would be the essential reason for deferral. So you really, the two are linked. So in relation to whether something is policy compliant or not, and whether you defer, you really must consider as well if you're deferring because for a reason that is associated with the wider issue of compliance with policy. So you shouldn't really be deferring something for a reason where the application is policy compliant, because there isn't really any room for manoeuvre for officers to discuss that with the applicant. But if you're deferring for a concern that is real and supportable by policy, then clearly the officers can go back and discuss that policy reason for deferral with the applicant. So that the two are a bit linked, but yes, officers need to know why committee is minded to defer.
Okay, thank you. Victoria, last word to you, last officer word to you.
Yeah, so obviously just picking up on that point. So obviously deferral is the option, is an option, and David did just touch on obviously the reasons. What I will add is obviously with deferral, the risk will come with it that the applicant may apply for non-determination. Because I think, and officers will correct me if I'm wrong, that the target date for determining this application has long passed. So if a deferral is made this evening, then there is a risk that the applicant can appeal on non-determination if no decision is made tonight.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Okay, we've had a very good discussion. We've had a lot of input from officers. Thanking everybody for that. But the time has come. So we have an application in front of us. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Kemp is proposing. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kay is seconding.
So what is being proposed, Chair?
Yes, I'm sorry, to be very...
I'm proposing that we accept the recommendation of the planning officer.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Ian. And I take it, Councillor Kay, you are seconding that. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you, Peter, again. So to be very clear, we have in front of us the following application for which we have a proposer and a seconder, in respect of which I'll call for a vote in a couple of moments. So the application is 320-0897 FUL, demolition of all buildings and erection of 49 dwellings comprising 17 apartments, 14 3-bedroom and 18 4-bedroom houses, construction of associated roadways, access, landscape and ancillary works at Hertford Mill site, Tamworth Road, Hertford. All those in favour, please show a hand.
Okay, keep your hands up, Chair, so I can count.
Yes, and please hold your hands on the screen.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Thank you very much, Peter. Those against? Well, thank you, Peter. Those against?
1, 2.
Thank you very much. And I think that's the maths, but I'll call for it anyway. Is there an abstention at all? No. In that case, this item is approved by the committee and carried. So again, just for the sake of the record, we have just agreed the following application, which is 320-0897 FUL, demolition of all buildings and erection of 49 dwellings comprising 17 apartments, 14 3-bedroom and 18 4-bedroom houses, construction of associated roadways, access, landscape and ancillary works at Hertford Mill site, Tamworth Road, Hertford. Thank you very much indeed for the usual extremely good debate and consideration of that item. We now move on to item 6 on the agenda. This is at page 105 of the paper pack. Items for reporting and noting. We simply need to note these items.
Yeah, you've got 2 full sets of this because of the missed January meeting.
Thank you very much. I can never remember whether I need to take a vote on this. Peter, do I need to take a vote on this?
No, it's just for noting. So if there's any queries, yeah, it's just for noting.
I'm not seeing any hands moving. Okay, good. So thank you very much for that, everybody. We've noted. That brings us to the final item, which is item 7, urgent business. I'm unaware of any urgent business.
No.
No. In that case, repeating the thanks for such careful consideration and deliberation. At 9:47, this meeting finishes. Thank you very much indeed.